Yiridu Marang, Mujigalang, Yawindi Jonathan Jones, Baladu Radri Bulgamiloroi Bulgibibu. Ngati Nina, Ninjamala, Mayangalangu, Narambangu, Garigobu Iorabu, Mayangalang. Ngati Ninjamala, Mujigalangalang, Yinabu Dayandu. Hello everyone, my name's Jonathan Jones. I'm Radri and Kamilaroi from the other side of the mountains. And I'd first like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And make a very special thank you to Uncle Chika and Uncle Alan for their warm welcome this morning. I'd also too like to acknowledge Auntie Julie Freeman, Uncle Bruce Pascoe, who have travelled up from the south coast. And in particular, I'd also really like to thank Dr. Uncle Stan Grant, Senior AM, who's travelled from Narandra to be with us here today. I'd also obviously like to acknowledge the Right Honourable Lord Mayor, along with Richard Neville and the team, including Kirsten and Ron from the Indigenous group here, who have made us feel really welcome and been a fantastic organisation to partner with. I'd also obviously like to acknowledge the Kaldor team, especially John, without whom none of us would be here today. And in particular, I'd also like to thank the formation of the Aboriginal Advisory Group that Kaldor Public Art Projects have put forward, including Hetty Perkins, Christine Evans, Jason Glanville, Michael McDaniel, and of course Uncle Chika. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge all of you here today. It's a little nervous. It's great to see some really familiar faces. There's some extraordinary people here today, and I hope that you'll get as much out of today as I'm sure I will. So as mentioned, today is the first of 3 symposiums connected to the project Barrangal Dyara, Skin and Bones, which opens in late September in the Royal Botanic Gardens, just 200 metres down the road from where we are today. This project looks at Sydney's Garden Palace of 1879. It looks at its rise, and I guess more importantly, it looks at its demise. And at the very heart of this story is how we remember things, or not remember things as the case may be. It is a project that I'm enormously honoured to be working on. As John said before, it's a project that's deeply affected many Aboriginal communities right across the southeast. And as such, it's an enormous responsibility to take on. And many of the people here today have been active contributors and very active in awakening this story and reminding me of many of its details. The Spot Fire Symposium took its name from the fire that in fact engulfed the Garden Palace on Friday, the 22nd of September 1882. It created an enormous heat convection that caused lumps of corrugated iron, ash and ember to descend throughout Sydney, from Balmain to Elizabeth Bay, creating spot fires all around the city. Today, these Spot Fire Symposiums have been designed to highlight the important elements of the project, and including today's topic, language and landscape, and then spectacle, manifestation and performance at the Art Gallery, and then loss and resilience at the Australian Museum. And these spot fires have really been designed to, I guess, fan the flames, get these stories going again, get these fires burning again, and get this knowledge back into our city. And of course, all of our hosts are descendants or relatives of the Garden Palace in one way or another. Today's not a straightforward symposium. In truth, it's something of a luxury for me, being the artist. I get to talk to some extraordinary people who have in fact informed this project and have given me knowledge and have really guided the project. And in many ways, I guess it should be considered almost like an open research symposium where we'll be discussing ideas. In saying that, I guess we're not directly talking to the Garden Palace, and we won't be directly talking to the artwork that's happening in September. In fact, we're really launching ideas and trying to get people thinking about the city and thinking about the landscape in different ways. So I'd encourage us all to sort of think about these bigger ideas and these bigger stories. And also, I should probably say that it needs to be noted that this program was designed in collaboration with Ross Gibson, and many of you would know that Ross is an extraordinary academic, one of the most amazing minds in our midst. But unfortunately, Ross wasn't able to be here with us today, and he sent his deepest apologies. But as a way of kickstarting the day off, I thought I might read a small passage from his book, 26 Views of the Starburst World, William Dawes at Sydney Cove. Today, hopefully, you're all going to walk away with a really extensive reading list of things that you have to read, and this is definitely one of them. This is an extraordinary book which really redefines the way we look at Sydney and understand the city that we call home. Of course, in this book, Ross really highlights the first colonial astronomer, William Dawes, who, of course, was sitting out at Dyara, or Dawes Point, looking at the stars. And while he was looking at the stars, he, in course, engaged with local Eora people and developed a very close relationship. So Ross states in one of his books, which I think really helps us to think about Sydney, the land myths are not the only persistent colonial narrative. You can revise Sydney's history responsibly enough by setting the colony in a different context, marine rather than terrene. This is not to deny the pastoralist dream that soon came to dominate the Australian consciousness for at least 150 years. But from the start of the colony, there have always been worldviews other than the pastoral available to the newcomer. Once the Pacific setting of Australian history is brought to fore, fluidity and mutability can be proposed as a communal characteristics amongst settlers as well as the coastal Eora. You can begin to see dynamic lines in the history. You can sense a more slippery intelligence moving just below the ruled territories. So in Ross's sort of own poetic way, he invites us to reimagine the city and invites us to look at a much deeper view of the city and uses Eora kind of worldviews at the heart of that. In order for us to maybe start thinking about a different city and a continuum of the city, the first person I'd really like to call up and speak is and have a conversation with and ask a few questions, if that's okay, is Uncle Chika. I was wondering if you would come up and maybe we could talk a little bit about some histories that we've spoken privately about before. I guess I was keen to talk to you because, as many of you would know, Uncle Chika's been an extraordinary leader in the community, played a very active role in the city. I guess in many ways, most people know you for your extraordinary public life, working on the boards of many organisations, all those key organisations in Redfern. And I think even holding an amazing title, like the longest board member on the Redfern Aboriginal Medical Service. Is that right?
Yes,
Is that right? Okay.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, about 1971, I think it was, I ended up on the board there, and right through until this year, I stepped down. My son's now on there, so it's been a long journey, and met a lot of very, very strong Aboriginal people, non-Aboriginal people, you know, over the years, and it's been great. Not only with the medical service, but with Aboriginal Hostels Australia too. I was invited onto the board there by Charles Perkins many years ago. It was a federal government appointment, and for 2 years, I ended up there for 6 years. And being on the board with the medical service and hostels, some of the people that I've met, you know, Naomi Mayers and Sol Belair, Dulcie Flowers, with the Hostels. We had Charlie Perkins was the chairperson, Tom Calmer from Darwin, he was the director from Darwin, and Lois O'Donoghue from South Australia, Neville Bonner from Queensland. Some really strong Aboriginal people, which was good.
So apart from your amazing life, which many of us know, like in those organisations and really, strengthening our community. Before that too, you've also been really active in creating Sydney. And this is something I've been talking to you a little bit about before, because you worked for a long time as a concrete driver and pumper on the railways, hey?
Yes, I started on the railway in 1966 when decimal currency first came in. Got a job there as a labourer. And one of my friends that I knew in Alexandria, from Kempsey, he got me the job there. I worked with him, travelling around New South Wales on a diamond drilling rig. But I was just started, had a young family, just starting up at the time, so a position come up at Sydenham to drive concrete wagons. So I thought, well, I'll be close to home, so I applied for it, got the job, so I was there for about 14 years, carting concrete all over Sydney. I think at the time we were supplying concrete to Randwick Council, Ashfield Council, Marrickville Council and all the railway positions. Some of the jobs was really good. Before that I worked on, helped build the Gladesville Bridge, Tarban Creek Bridge, Eastern Suburbs Railway, underground, worked on concrete wagons, concrete pumps. Worked in construction practically all my life, and
So anyone who came here this morning by train probably came in something that you helped build.
yes, I pumped concrete all the way through from Redfern to Central and back out towards the eastern suburbs. Yeah,
And I guess this is this thing, isn't it? That I guess it's we don't talk about the fact that the Aboriginal community here in Sydney has played an enormous role in shaping the city. In terms of building, like Uncle Alan's been telling me about, was it Uncle Ray Vincent was working on the Opera House?
yeah, they were riggers on the Opera House and scaffolders. Yeah, the work there, and on the Gladesville Bridge we had Aussie crews, Benny crews, all from down the south coast, and La Perouse boys. There was very good. What people probably don't understand is, in the early days you had Redfern, Waterloo, Alexandria, Zetland. That was the industrial hub of Australia, really. All the industry was there. Aboriginals who worked in the country areas, when they left school, they went to school, when they were working age, there was no work there. They wouldn't get a job on the railway, unless they were lucky, they knew someone. Wouldn't get a job in any of the shops, might fluke a job on a station. But if they come to Sydney, there was work everywhere. That's how the influx of Aboriginals into the metropolitan area, especially around the Redfern, Waterloo area, Alexandria, was very heavy because there was work here. You got a wage every week, which was good. Growing up in the inner city was pretty good too, because that was all working class. There was no discrimination because you lived next door to non-Aboriginal people. They're all working, drank in the pub together. As long as the licensing sergeant never come around and kicked you out, you're right. You could go in and have a beer. My poor old dad, he was a return digger. Been kicked out of pubs on Anzac Day, because he wasn't allowed into the RSL time. But they were sad days, but happy days too, because you had a lot of good friends around.
And I guess what we've been talking about is that, the coming together of the Garden Palace, this idea of industry in Australia kicking over, but also this new industry happening in Sydney and Koori's building it, and Koori's coming together and forming the Redfern, and that sort of inner city Aboriginal community through industry, through activities, through working.
Yes, I think it's a great idea, and for all the culture that's been lost in that fire, we can regain a lot of it. And I think this is a really positive move in the right direction for all Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals. The hardest part of it was, growing up in Redfern was easy with the people you work with and knew, your neighbours. But if you go out into the suburbs further, it was totally different because they didn't know Aboriginals, and they'd look at you strangely,
Yeah.
But once you got to know them, they were very, very nice people, The hard part was, because after the Second World War, we had an influx of Europeans come from a war-torn area in Europe, yet they seemed to recognise the Aboriginals more than anyone else. They knew because where they came from and the trouble that they went through, they could see it happening still in Australia. There was a lot of racism. Redfern, we had two fruit shops down the bottom near Abercrombie Street many, many years ago. No, it wasn't. Sorry, it was in Newtown.
Yeah, right.
One of my bosses that I work with was telling me about it. Two fruit shops, probably about 50 metres apart, and one fella had out the front of his shop a big sign. Because the Italians owned the shop down the road. Had a sign up. Shop here before the day goes.
Yeah, right.
Things like that. They complained about it and the council made them pull it down.
Yeah, right.
They were just little things, I used to go to the club and there'd be people sitting there talking about jokes, about Aboriginals, and that everyone laughed and that, but that wasn't the case.
And
And
so,
the strange part of it was, just down the road here, Parliament House, I sat in there once with I was two Aboriginals in the chambers. There's a lot in the gallery. Three really. Linda Burney was there. She was one of the politicians. There was a lady there, our first female Premier of New South Wales, Christine Keneally, who was an American lady, married an Australian, come out and got involved in politics and was our first Premier. All Parliament together, she moved a motion to recognise Aboriginals as being human beings and not part of the flora and fauna. Full credit to Barry O'Farrell. He was there with the Liberal Party and he agreed with her 100%. But, why did it take an American woman to come out here and get involved to do that? They want us recognise us in the Constitution. But I think, I don't know, I won't get into that. I'll leave that. No, growing up in Redfern was pretty good. And, where we worked there, my brother, for many, many years, he was the director on the board, but he worked there as a sites and cultural officer for 14 years. That was Alan that was there early. He was the sites and cultural officer of the Metro Land Council. He knows where more Aboriginal carvings and sites are than anyone, I think, around Sydney and around the harbour.
and he's often said that Sydney, in fact, is the biggest gallery in the world.
Yes, that's true. He's often said that, yeah. And he can name where all the supermarkets were, as he calls them, where all the food sources come from.
And I was keen to ask you, because relating to that, when you retired, after building bridges, after digging, like pouring tunnels, you know, even working on places like the Everleigh Railway Yards, which is of course carriage works today, they got you making pots. How did that start?
My nephew talked me into going to ride TAFE after I retired, and he says, we'll go over there and do a course on Aboriginal culture and site preservation. I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. So we went over to ride TAFE. I went over there, me and the missus went over there. I signed up to do the course. Come back and I rang me nephew up. I said, I signed up today. I said, have you been over yet? He says, nah, my missus has got a job, so I'm going to look after the kids. So I ended up going over there on my own. I went there for 4 years doing this Aboriginal sites and culture and site preservation. Went back for the next year. I would have got a diploma, but the class dismissed there. They said, oh no, you can go out to Penrith, the Hawkesbury tape, and finish it out there. Thinking to myself, I just finished 5 years up in the Blue Mountains doing the railway, putting the concrete sleepers through there. I'm not going to go out to Penrith. So they said, go to the Aura Centre at Chippendale. They got a TAFE there. I went down there and I signed up, went to class, everything they were doing I'd already done. I said, well, why don't you try your hand at ceramics? I was thinking to myself, I'm freaking help build the Gladesville Bridge and the Eastern Suburb Railway. Now you want me to make pots. I said, well, okay, well, I'll give it a go. That was about 6 years ago. Still doing it. I made a pot. I don't know, the ladies, besides all my grandkids, the ladies seem to be getting everything. I made a pot for Christine Keneally, our first female Premier in New South Wales. One for Marie Bashir, our first female Governor of New South Wales. I made one for the Queen of England when she came out. Made one for my friend Clover, our first elected female Lord Mayor of Sydney. I was at tea one night at the Governor's house and Clinton Bryce was there, and when I was mentioning that to her secretary who was sitting next to me, he said, well, Clinton's the first female Governor-General of Australia. You've got to make her a pot.
What does Nanny Lil say about all these women?
She was the first, she got hers. So Clinton's pot's sitting at home there, got to be finished. And I made one for the Queen. Prince William come to the block there. I made a pot for him with Aboriginal rock art on it. Then his father come out with Camilla at Government House not long ago. I gave him a pot. And the Governor was sitting there and standing there when I did it, and he said, well, you've given the Queen a pot, her son a pot, his son a pot, you've got to make one for George. And there was a female in the background saying, don't forget Charlotte.
That's the one on the kitchen table now, isn't it?
George's pot's being made there. In June, July, he's going down over to London. So I got a letter from him. He wants to take it to London. Yeah, right. To George. So.
Well, no, I think it's just so valuable to have you involved in the project, you know. And I'd obviously like to thank you so much. But it's been, you know, that generosity that I think you can hear and see that has really helped guide the project. You know, that there's, I think we've talked before that Sydney's always been in a hosting people. You're always hosting people, and you're very good hosts, and that's really helped the project.
Yeah, and I think if we get the Sydney language back and start teaching it, I think there's a lot of people talking about it, so I just hope it gets up and running, because it'll be great. Everything started here in Sydney. Keep it going, yes. I think what the Kaldor Project's doing is great.
Okay, thanks, boss.
Okay.
So I think what I was keen to sort of talk today about, or explain and sort of line up some of the things that are happening today, as I was saying before, is this multiple voices that we're really hoping to capture as part of this project. As I said to you before, this project is become an enormous project and a huge responsibility, and in many ways it's not my project. It's a project which has really become everyone who's contributed to that project, and today there are some of those enormous contributors, and Uncle Chick is definitely one of them. And I guess what I was interested in I guess presenting with that idea is that Aboriginal ways of understanding, Aboriginal ways of doing things involves multiple knowledge systems. We work with across dialogues, across ideas, and we weave things together. In a more Western, traditional Western sort of approach, knowledge is often broken down into sections. I guess the kind of world where the scientist, doesn't really talk to a historian, and don't really talk to the community. What we're trying to do here is actually put all those people at the table to talk together again, and to reimagine a building and to reimagine a history, so that we've lost. So it's within that vein barrangal dyara has been conceived. And in order to sort of reimagine and re-understand a lost memory, we've been working across disciplines, working with historians, community, archaeologists, botanists, architects, storytellers, linguists, from both within the Aboriginal community and within the mainstream community. And today's talk is very much part of trying to open up our ideas to those. Yet, I guess, in order to make sense of all these vast different knowledge systems that we're tapping into, these sort of tributaries of ideas which eventually flow into one river, I guess I was keen to present us with another metaphor. And in a way, what I was trying to do was confuse us even more, I guess, in one way. So it is, in one aspect, I guess, the story needs to become more complicated before it becomes understandable. And I really wanted to achieve that. I really wanted to lean on, I guess, a way of understanding country and landscape, which was taught to me by my elders in Bathurst, who, like many elders across the country, will always use the metaphor of animals to help us guide us through really complex problems. And so for today's problem, trying to understand language and landscape, and in fact it's an idea that we're working on across all the symposiums, I was really keen to introduce the element of our birds. And I guess I was interested in introducing birds because, especially in terms of language, because when the British first invaded Sydney, they were overwhelmed with the cacophony of birds. Journals are sort of covered in this idea that birds were making too much noise. They were not pretty noises. They were unattractive noises. They were squawks. They were screeches that people had never heard before. And of course, we know today that there's 700 endemic species of birds to Australia. But the way those birds activated the landscape can also be seen in the same way that Aboriginal languages activated the landscape. And of course, we know there's over 350 different languages right across this country that named every leaf, every river, every mountain had a name and was activated by our languages. And so in that way, I was interested in thinking about this idea of Australia that's been obviously talked about recently, that Australia obviously has the world's oldest songbirds, which to me, of course, resonated very deeply, that we've got the world's oldest language and cultural practices from here. And so for me, connecting these two ideas, the birds and our culture, sat together very well. I was also really interested that in fact in Wiradjuri, our birds and their songs have in fact given rise to their names. Or perhaps, I'm interested in throwing this out there, have our names given rise to the birds? Many of you would recognise words like the Gugubara, which is Kookaburra in Wiradjuri, which is probably one of the most obvious examples. Garu, the magpie, sings his name, along with Wan, the crow, Wagan, the crow, or Gilar, the galah, and Bulan Bulan, the little crimson rosella which cruises across the sky. Their names teach us the language. And for someone like me who isn't very good at language, I'm still struggling, I'm always interested that in fact you need to listen to country. If you listen to your country, you will learn the language. If I listen to those birds, they're telling me their names. They're calling out their names to me. So my teachers are everywhere in my country. So the other idea that I was really keen to sort of think about was this quote which came from Captain John Hunter. And he stated, there were a great variety of birds in this country. All of the parrot tribe, such as the cockatoo, lorry, green parrot, parakeets of different kinds, sizes, clothed with the most beautiful plumage that can be conceived. It would require the pencil of an able linesman to draw such, to give a stranger an idea of them. The common crow is found here in considerable numbers, but the sound of their voice and manner of croaking is very different from those in Europe. There are also vast numbers of hawks, various sizes and colours. Here, likewise, pigeons, quails, with a great variety of smaller birds, but none I have found with a pleasing note. Which was really interesting, because this idea that the early settlers didn't like the sound of our birds. And for me, that connected very deeply with something Uncle Stan and I have been talking about for a long time, is this idea of why is it now that our Aboriginal languages are waking up? Why is it now that they're bubbling up to the surface? It's not because people like Uncle Stan haven't been working their whole lives, putting them on the map. It's because there's a change in people's listening. And I think the same thing can be said of our birds, that in fact we love the sound of our birds. There's nothing more Australian to hear a kookaburra, to hear a magpie in the morning. In fact, it fills my heart, with so much pride and understanding about landscape. And I think that shift in people's idea of what they're hearing is potentially the same thing. So that love affair that we're starting to have with our birds, that helps identify us as Australians, is starting to take effect with Aboriginal languages as well. Thank you. And I think it really talks to that shift, which we'll talk to Uncle Stan about later. But as Uncle said to me, it's the right time. Right now is the right time. People are ready to hear our languages again. They're ready to hear the dawn chorus of 350 different Aboriginal languages to be spoken across this country. I'd like to make special mentions of the community in parks in Wiradjuri country, which I think really highlights this like no other, where a small community of some 12,000 people, central New South Wales, 5 schools are currently teaching over 1,000 students, whether they're Aboriginal or not. They're all learning Wiradjuri, all learning the language of their country, all learning where they come from. And I'd obviously like to make special mention of Jeff Anderson, who's here today from Parks and who's really led that project.